So, first of all, I just want to thank everybody for coming out to this event on behalf of IDC and Engage. It's been a fantastic couple of days here, and I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope you have as well. So we're just going to take a couple of minutes, give our thoughts, final thoughts if you like, but also, welcome feedback here. You have questions with these guys, happy to have a bit of a dialogue. We have about 15 minutes or so. So I thought I'd just start with one thing that I really thought was powerful, that I think everybody should take home with them. And that was actually something that Blaine focused on, was that Monday morning or Sunday? I can't remember now. Anyhow, he talked about use cases. So he showed the 17 or so typical industries and the typical processes and how that flows into use cases that tie into business processes. And that, I think, so IDC, we have our 700 use cases, and, there's lots of taxonomies for this, and it doesn't really matter whose you use. But the use case is really what connects the IT discussion to the line of business. It's that business process. That's the business problem that the business executives have. That's where we need to connect. And I think that's really powerful, because the other thing that we've said here, everybody talked about the need to move forward. Well, okay, so we're all moving forward at different paces. We come from different starting points on that maturity scale, and that's all great. But picking those high-value use cases that tie into what the business executives really care about, I thought that was pretty powerful. So that's something I think everybody should think about. Then wanted to maybe connect here to Bill, because one of the things I thought was really interesting, Bill said, you have to market IT. You have to be in the marketing game to the line of business. But then he said, all these new rules, the new rules of the game leads to new metrics. So maybe some thoughts from you, Bill, in terms of what you learned, but also kind of final thoughts around new KPIs, new metrics to manage your IT group.
I guess a general impression that I wanted to relay is that the quality of attendee at this particular CIO conference, and we speak at a lot of them, our little group speaks at about 50 a year all over the world, and there's a maturity here that was evidenced. That's a step up from last year, and that was a step up from the year before. The panelists, for example, that first panelist on Sunday night, what I got excited about when I was sitting on the end was the fact everything they were describing they were doing were symptoms of what I would call a thriving IT organization in terms of how they're being able to accomplish digital transformation. The questions that surfaced from the audience to the speakers or the panels reflected that same kind of maturing aspect of connecting business outcomes to, what it is that they do. You asked specifically about marketing and KPIs. That seems to be understood here. When I first started saying about the marketing IT years ago, the reaction was like, "Are you not in the real world or something?" It was, and now it's just expected that a CIO and the top-level IT executives are going to know something about how to position themselves to the business to be a partner. I think that's a major step forward, and it was evidenced at this conference. And the discussion around KPIs, Michael Eubanks in our fireside chat emphasized that the basics are what he emphasizes. He knows that he needs to deliver stuff on time, highly available, etc. That's the thing that allows you to get into the game. But when you're trying to justify what you provide in that, quote, marketing IT concepts, and that's all you can talk about, that's not all he can talk about, which was so obvious in the two times he was up on the stage. But it's a trap. And I think we need to step back and figure out, what do I need to do in my company, in my industry, to demonstrate my value proposition to what this enterprise is trying to do? And again, it wasn't, the thing I really liked about this particular conference is this wasn't new thinking. It was more like, well, okay, I get that, but how do I do that? And they were moving on to that next step. You go through the what and the why, and they're how here. So I like that.
Yeah, yeah. Any, so the other thing I took away was blockchain, that there are actual people moving blockchain into production. Because sometimes we hear that it's not happening or it's far out and so forth. I thought that was pretty powerful from Stewart when you talked about that.
Yeah, and I think I just touched on a few use cases. There are many other use cases during the break. I heard about how Florida is now putting all of their driver's licenses on a blockchain. Talked to BC government about how they're doing a prototype with the sovereign network. There's additional information within IDC. There are we have industry-specific analysts, and so there's a lot of content right now, I know, on blockchain in government. There's a lot of content on blockchain in manufacturing, a lot of content on blockchain in supply chain and distribution. So there's definitely, there's a whole plethora of use cases. There are things actually moving towards and into production. For years, I won't even say maybe for months, it's moving that quickly. A lot of people have likened blockchain to TCP/IP. You think about the old networking, the old SNA and that sort of thing, networking, and how TCP/IP came along, and then email was the first application on top of TCP/IP, and then we got into the World Wide Web, and that took 20, 25 years. They're saying that it's going to take a long time for blockchain to come to that maturity, to get things into production, but it's moving a lot faster than TCP/IP ever did. And that's partly because of the open source community, and partly because of all of those in that 4 quadrant, all of those different groups and organizations, all those smart people that are working on trying to find answers to these problems. So I think it's going to move a lot faster, and we're going to get there with some real solutions that we're going to be interacting with every day.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I just want to share a thing that happened to me in the lobby after your presentation. An individual identified the fact that they had actually quizzed several advisory services, and a major one had explained to them that it's way out in the future, don't even worry about it. And that was just 6 months ago. And he said one of the things that he liked here was your emphasis on there's things that we need to be doing now, even though it's not really known. And again, there was this quality of CIO that was saying, I didn't like that answer. I knew I needed to do something. And I thought it was an interesting observation, the different kind of advice you will get on something that's new. And, Stewart was emphasizing there's really stuff that needs to be done now.
And then, of course, Nigel, I'm not sure if I should, whether you should laugh or cry, with what's going on in terms of the world. But I thought, I will definitely go home and look up Twitch, because I know that's where my kids are hiding. They're watching Twitch. I bet you that's what they're doing. Maybe we can just go back one slide there, that final slide, if we could pull that up before there. So we talked about this a lot throughout the event. Security, privacy, we've spent a lot of time talking about that, and that's, again, emphasized by Nigel here. From your point of view, Nigel, what would you advise a CIO, IT decision maker when it comes to, what do you view as the number one thing to do at this point? I know, putting you on the spot, right?
Always hard. I'd say one of the things to do is iterate faster. That first point there about get started, then iterate faster. We did research last year, and we looked at the adoption of IoT across the world and Canada by industry and by business line, by type of process. And what we found in pretty consistently was that when we did a regression analysis back to how fast their revenues were growing, the companies with faster growing revenues were almost always faster at adopting the new technologies, right? They may struggle, they may fail, but the lessons they learn from those struggles and failures will inform better decisions the next time. And the way they do it is just iterating faster and faster. And I'm not saying you have to be a devotee of agile, right? That's not my point here. It's that if you're planning to have a long cycle, you won't get the lessons learned fast enough. So start with some projects that will see return on investment either way, whether it works or not, and then just keep moving. And you'll find that that will get business on your side, acting as an advocate for you to do the changes that you want to do. And in terms of the ideas, there's almost too many ideas out there that you could iterate on first. So you've got to do some sort of sorting criteria of how you're going to do that. And one of the quotes I like to use for that is from Picasso, which is that good artists copy, but great artists steal, right? So stop looking down the street at your competitor. If you're in Windsor, don't look across just to Detroit as your examples of who else you might be competing against. Look to the places that are growing in ways that you wouldn't have expected. Like look at China, look at Indian companies, look at Europe, and start looking at even companies that are not in your industry. There's an example that someone was telling me about in the wholesale distribution market, which was that they were in Vegas. And in Vegas, you move the beer in your fridge and you get charged for it. So he was a little annoyed about that. But then he had an idea. He worked on high-value goods in pharmaceuticals. So all of a sudden he realized he could use the same system to track and trace how the cold chain was working. And he's called up basically the people who make the components with inside the fridge to try and do that and digitize the compartments that he was trying to get the pharmacist to use. All he was doing was stealing somebody else's idea, moving it from a different industry to his, but it meant that he had a first mover advantage there. And so that ability to have first mover advantage and iterating faster and faster, even if you make mistakes, as long as you learn from them, it's going to be required in the new economy.
Yeah, I think that is key. I think regardless of what industry you're in, you have to become really good at understanding what not just your competitors are doing, but what others around the world are doing that could affect the processes that are most important to your company, and take advantage of that. That ability to be knowledgeable, be the tip of the spear inside your company in terms of technology, and be inventive and try new things. I think that is one of the core things. You're not going to know necessarily what comes down the pipe, so it's a matter of learning fast and failing fast as well. So we got these really smart guys here. Some questions you guys want to, things you've been taking notes about, that you're thinking about, that you want to, or things you may have learned that you want to share with the rest of the audience as well. We've got a couple of minutes here. Over here.
It's not a question. I don't know if I could just make a small comment, because I've heard a lot in the last 2 days. People are looking for use cases, ideas, and we're always looking kind of at the same type of media. There's been 3 websites that I use a lot that help me let me know what's the latest that's up and coming in the world. And I don't know if I can mention them, just maybe if it can help you guys. It can be education, retail. So the first one is springwise.com. Just like as you spelled spring, like the season, springwise.com,
yep.
trendwatching.com, and trendhunter.com. Trend Hunter does a major report of about 158 deck slides on every possible, from fashion to retail to healthcare, and there's really cool stuff. Springwise, you can register at their free newsletter, and what you get is every day you have 3 brilliant ideas, innovative stuff that people are doing from around the world. So it could be a startup in Istanbul that is reaching right where you're at. It could be an idea you use in a different sector, like you were mentioning, that really can apply to what you're doing. It just makes it easier. Mm-hmm. And I found that a lot of these ideas, I'm not able to find them as easily in the mainstream media. Right. And even some specialized websites. So I just wanted to share that because it's just helped me. Maybe it could help somebody else in the room. Thank you for everything. It's very useful.
Oh, that's fantastic. So that was Springwise, Trend Hunter, and Trendwatching.
For me, it reinforces the idea that we're playing by new rules, that you could find those 3 websites that were so effective at what you were trying to do, and then your statement, you couldn't find it in the main media. It wasn't there. Probably are the analyst houses that you're used to dealing with. So again, the rules are changing, and it's kind of exciting, especially when you discover something good.
Yeah, we've got another.
Hi, thank you. This has been a great session. I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas on the workforce that we're going to need, both re-equipping the current workforce, but the workforce that's going to be coming out of our schools, and some of your thoughts and ideas on the not just the technical skills, but the other kinds of skills that we need to be ensuring are infused within our workforce.
I
Yeah.
can take a really quick stab at it, but it's a really hard problem for a variety of reasons. Canadian companies underinvest in training pretty much across the board. They, at best, pay lip service. Everyone hears that thing about, the most valuable thing we have in the company is our people. But if you look at how much they actually are willing to invest in their frontline staff in terms of training and education, especially on an ongoing basis, it's remarkable how underprepared people are. And so you look at a whole bunch of the trades, and the trades increasingly are not just a trade, but you're also effectively a server administrator or a network administrator at the same time. The rise of IoT means that you're dealing with Cat5, Cat6 cable, even if you're just doing something like point of sale installations, right? Like everybody is now a network administrator in the field. And the training for it has lagged. And it's kind of a catch-all between the provincial government, the colleges, the universities, even the high school, and companies. So I think there's two separate things to jump off. One of which is training for a specific job is a thing of the past. You need to be trained to learn because you're not going to have that job for nearly as long as you had in any other generation. And the college and university system especially are not doing a very good job of that because they're very much still the traditional mentality of a 4-year program, carry on, and not the idea of refreshing and moving. So you see companies like massive online campuses, MOOCs, growing to do that, fill that gap, but they haven't got certification in the same way. So that's a hard problem for people to solve. And the second thing is, again, going back to how you think about your companies, if people really are what you value, and recruiting in Canada is hard, especially in technology, and especially in the valued areas, invest in them. Right? If you invest in people, they will respect that, and they will hopefully stay with your company. And at the very least, what you see a lot of is boomerang. They might leave, but they'll come back with new skills. And that's something that needs to be respected. A lot of people are worried that if you pay for your staff to get trained, to learn new skills, to skill up, that then they will use that to get a new, higher paying job somewhere else. And it's just a risk you have to take, but it's one that will help your company and your department and your people if you were willing to invest in them.
I just want to comment that there's something that really scares me. When you talk about training and you go to talk about universities and colleges and training centers or something, it makes complete sense. But I worry about how do you train a generation to effectively communicate in a way that's acceptable to multi-generations, even their own generation. And, I've been reading a book that was quite fascinating. It was called Quiet, and it talks about how we're moving from a society that has emphasized extrovert behavior as desirable, especially within the business community, for decades. And we're now beginning to understand the value of listening to the people that are more introverted, and that's very true in the technology society. And there's benefits to doing that. But then also we're dealing with people that really struggle at figuring out how to communicate effectively. I don't know what to suggest about that. I don't think that's something you can go to a class and get training on. It's something that's a real life experience. You get it on the job. I think it used to be part of our school system, but I don't know where to go with that. But
No,
I look at people that are succeeding, they're effective at communicating, and that makes me nervous.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are core skills: communication, rapid learning, acquiring new skills, being flexible, and all those things. And hard to say what the true answer is, but clearly, as business leaders, we have to support and make that investment within our own groups and departments. Personally, I think you just use a Slack channel and you're done with communications. But
I would just add to Bill's comment. There's lots of opportunities for networking. There's lots of organizations to help with communication. Toastmasters is one of them. Great opportunity to learn how to speak in front of people, learn how to communicate, learn how to become a leader in whatever you're in. So I'll just plug that because I am a Toastmaster. So
there you go.
But yeah, certainly networking, those soft skills are critical. The technical knowledge is great, but the soft skills are things that people are just going to learn as they go along. And I know they're tough to teach in a college or university setting, and that's why you have a lot of these other institutions and organizations outside of that.
Good stuff.
This is our 12th event this year, and this is the common thread that is through every single one of our events is what's the next generation? How do we keep them motivated? How do we train them? And it's, I don't have the answer, I'm just saying it, but it is the common thread. And it's not just all technology events that we do, we have events in design, events in AV, and it's a conundrum.
Yeah, for sure. Other comments? Any other topics in the back here? We have...
Just on the communication piece, I've really tried hard to connect with, I come from a large family, so I was aware of maybe almost 1.5 sort of trends in, boomers and busters and all that stuff. And I think most of us here, a little bit older, if you did a personality profile, we're pretty tight. And so we're fearful of, kids can only tweet now, and they can barely tweet. And they're into Snapchat, and they're looking at their phones all the time. In listening to people who know about more than I do, at least, language, the elasticity and plasticity of language and people communicating, just remember, blogging is a huge thing. And so I think we shouldn't be as fearful about the future in terms of the next generation communicating. I think the training part is really essential. And with the speed of technology, I think we need some wisdom in knowing how to train the next generation. As Nigel said, they may be off in 18 months. And certainly that's been my experience. Like our parents stayed at the same job all the time. I've had maybe 5 or 8 jobs, and that whole trend that our kids, my kids, might have more than that. So I don't think we need to be fearful about the language part, because historically, at least English has done that many times. How we train them to kind of merge the social, the arts, and the technology piece, I think that's really important. And just that word relational is massively important to the next generation.
Just to add on to that, I'm not actually that worried about the kids, so to speak. They're going to have typed more words by the time they're 22 than most of us have by the time we're 50, right? When we talk about communication, they do it in a different way than we did, but we did it differently than our parents, right? It's the nature change. Everyone thinks the next generation doesn't have moral fiber, or in the 50s you'd argue that as well. What I'm more worried about in terms of how fast things are changing is people over 40. And the reason for that is when you start having a family and a mortgage, and you've got responsibilities, and then you can't keep a job, that is devastating for the family, for the provider, for the community. And if we do see automation come through, and the prediction at the beginning of my talk was wrong, we see it kind of like what happened to U.S. manufacturing after China was admitted to the World Trade Organization. That super rapid transition where factories just go bankrupt. You look at Smith Falls, they lost their 5 major employees within 3 years. It took them a decade, and the only reason Smith Falls, Ontario, is back hiring, people have jobs, is because of pot, of all things, right? But otherwise, that became a desolate industrial town, and that's happened all across the U.S. Rust Belt, and it's really hard for people in their 40s and 50s to retrain. So talking about what to do, it seems trite to say the kids will be all right, but they'll be all right. Like, they know how to live in a digital world. They grew up in it. They've never not known Facebook. They've never not known cell phones. Like, it's unbelievable to us, but they've never not been a thinking person without a phone.
Yeah. No,
the problem who we're worried about is what do you do about the 50-year-old who's only got a high school degree?
And
What's their future?
And the kids are going to move to the large urban areas where the development is happening. It's the ones that are left behind, and whether it's small town Ontario or anywhere else in Canada, that will be in real trouble, for sure. So on that happy note, I guess.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nigel. Other comments that are technology related as opposed to political issues? Otherwise, thank you so much. We'll hand it back to Phil to close us out. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a great round of applause for the IDC analyst team.